Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, I was thinking about 1998 this morning.
Oh, yeah.
It's just such a strange year to look back on, right? Everything in the tech world is trying to get bigger, louder, faster. You had the PlayStation pushing 3D. PC gaming was just exploding with complexity.
Right.
But then you look in your pocket, and there's this quiet revolution happening that is strictly 8-bit.
Game Boy Color.
Exactly. And we aren't just talking about a cosmetic paint job here. We are diving into a stack of retrospective reviews and technical breakdowns today to understand a very specific evolution. We're moving from the soup green screen of the original brick to a system that actually understood what the word color meant.
It's a pivotal moment in handheld history. But the way we're going to look at it today is, I think, unique. We aren't just going chronologically,
Right.
We're climbing a ladder. We are tracing the evolution of this system through the lens of cartridge size.
Which I love as a concept. It's like looking at the rings of a tree to see the history of the forest. We're going to start at the tiny 256 kilobyte cartridges, which were basically just digital crossword puzzles.
Right.
And climb all the way up to the massive 4 megabyte giants that were quite literally trying to shove a PlayStation experience into a piece of plastic the size of a cracker.
It's the best way to see the ambition of the developers. You see them fighting against the limits of the silicon, every step of the way. It's a story of how much magic can we fit in this box?
So before we load that first cartridge, set the stage for us. The source material makes a big deal about the hardware jump. What actually changed under the hood? Was it a supercomputer compared to the original?
Not a supercomputer, but let's call it a very smart hot rod. The original Game Boy processor ran at about 4 megahertz. The Color doubled that to 8 megahertz.
Okay.
Now, that sounds small today. Your toaster probably has more processing power, but doubling your clock speed is massive for game logic. But the screen, that's the headline.
The source material jokes that the original Game Boy's darkest shade of gray was just slightly lighter than intended.
It's a fair critique. I mean, the original was 4 shades of muddy green-gray. You basically had to hallucinate the graphics half the time.
Yeah.
The Color could support up to 56 simultaneous colors on screen from a palette of over 32,000. That is a quantum leap in visual information. But there's a hidden hero here that the sources highlight.
Oh.
The memory mappers.
Mappers. Guess define that for the listener who isn't a hardware engineer.
Sure. Think of the Game Boy like a person with a very small desk. They can only have one book open at a time.
Okay, I'm with you.
The mapper is a chip inside the game cartridge that acts like a librarian. It allows the Game Boy to swap out which book or chunk of memory it's looking at instantly. Without mappers, you're stuck with tiny games. With advanced mappers, you can have massive worlds, battery saves, and complex logic, even though the Game Boy itself hasn't changed its desk size.
So the console didn't strictly get more powerful. The cartridges just get smarter at feeding it information.
Precisely. And that technology evolved rapidly between 1998 and 2001.
Okay, let's start at the bottom rung, the 256 kilobyte era. To put that in perspective for you listening, a single high-res photo on your phone today is probably 10 times larger than these entire games.
Oh, easily. These are microscopic by modern standards, and because of that constraint, the developers were boxed in. You don't have space for cutscenes. You don't have space for complex AI. So you make puzzles.
And the source material highlights a game called ROX. It's pitched as a color version of Tetris, which, sounds like a slam dunk. Tetris prints money.
It should.
But then you actually look at the mechanics described in the review, and it gets weirdly complicated.
It does. It feels like a case of change for the sake of change. In Tetris, the logic is universal.
Right.
Fill a line, it disappears.
Right.
In ROX, you're dropping hexagonal cubes.
Hexagons. Already harder to stack than squares.
Much harder. And the rule set the source outlines is just baffling. You aren't just matching colors, you have to connect lines with identical numbers or edges, and the inner cubes in a line have to have numbers greater than the ones at the ends.
Wait, so I need to do comparative math while blocks are falling?
Apparently.
Huh?
It suggests that the developers were struggling to justify the color aspect. They couldn't just do Tetris again, so they over-engineered the mechanics to add a layer of strategy. That sounds frustrating, honestly.
It sounds like a headache. But then you have Dragon Dance. Now this is still 256 KB, but the review seems much more favorable here. It's described as a creative take on tennis.
It's sort of Breakout meets tennis meets fantasy. Instead of a paddle or a racket, you control a dragon. You're clearing stripes from the field, but you're also fighting bosses.
Oh, that's cool.
This is a great example of doing more with less. They didn't have space for a story, so they put the personality into the mechanic itself.
It's clever. And then, briefly, the source mentions Elmo's 1-2-3. It's a kids counting game. Why even include this in a technical deep dive?
Asset management, the review notes it had beautiful screensavers, and that matters because it shows that even with tiny memory, if you aren't spending CPU power on a complex gameplay, you can make a static image look really, really good.
It's a trade-off.
It's all a trade-off. You sacrifice interactivity for beauty.
So we're seeing the developers learn the ropes, but now we double the capacity. We're stepping up to the 512 kilobyte era. And this is where the source material gets a little spicy.
It does. We start seeing some cultural commentary creeping into what is supposed to be a tech review.
Specifically regarding Mrs. Pac-Man. The reviewer points out that the Mrs. Pac-Man cartridge is 512 kilobytes, twice the size of the original Pac-Man. And they draw this conclusion that feminist ideas were inflating the file size.
Yeah, that's a unique take from the source. They compare it to the movie Mulan and suggest, pretty subjectively, that they should have left everything as it was.
Right.
It's a fascinating snapshot of a reviewer's bias, but if we look at it technically, that extra 256 kilobytes wasn't used for ideology.
I was going to say, I don't think political opinions take up drive space.
No, they don't. That space went into more maze variations, improved color palettes, and likely slightly better ghost AI. The original Pac-Man on Game Boy was incredibly bare bones.
Okay.
Mrs. Pac-Man was just a more polished product. It's a good reminder that sometimes a bigger file size just means better code, not a statement.
Speaking of polish, we have to talk about Tetris DX. The source calls this a wonder.
And it is. This is the gold standard of the 512 KB tier. The original Game Boy Tetris was 32 kilobytes.
Heidi.
Tetris DX is 512. That is a 16 times increase.
What do you even do with that much extra space for Tetris? Do the blocks have backstories?
You make it feel luxurious. It wasn't about changing the core gameplay like ROX did. It was about saving your high scores, which the original couldn't do when you turned it off.
Oh, that's huge.
It was about adding color that actually helped you distinguish pieces and smoothing out the animations. It felt premium. It proved you didn't need a complex genre to utilize the hardware, you just needed to refine the experience.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have Rampage. Project S.
The DMEC.
Right. Taking a big arcade concept and shrinking it down. The source describes it as a space shooter, where you just blow everything up.
Yeah.
And there's this funny aside that Rampage eventually inspired a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson movie.
Which is just wild to think about looking at a 512 KB cartridge. But it shows the staying power of these simple gameplay loops. Smash buildings, smash monsters. It works on a cinema screen, and it works on a Game Boy.
Okay, we are climbing higher. We've hit the 1 megabyte milestone. Now, for the black and white Game Boy, 1 MB was the ceiling. It was the absolute limit.
It was.
But for the color, this is where things get really ambitious.
This is the porting era. Developers stopped looking at the Game Boy as a puzzle machine and started asking, can I fit a home console game on this?
And the answer was usually, sort of. We've got Mortal Kombat 4. Now, fitting a 3D fighting game onto this hardware seems like a fool's errand.
It required compromise. I mean, you can't do 3D models. You have to use sprites, 2D images. The source notes, they look slightly funny, probably a bit squashed and lacking detail.
Oh, yeah.
But, and this is key, the fatalities were impressive.
And knew their audience.
Exactly. They prioritized the gore and the spectacle, the brand identity of Mortal Kombat over the fidelity of the character models.
Then there's Ghosts and Goblins. The source calls it the most difficult NES game, and now it's in your pocket.
A faithful port. And that's a theme here. Prince of Persia is another one mentioned, almost identical to the NES version. At 1 MB, the Game Boy Color became a portable NES. That was the selling point. Take your living room with you.
But not every port survived the transition intact. Let's talk about Earthworm Jim. On the Sega Genesis, or SNES, Jim is all about fluid, zany animation. He's a cartoon come to life.
He is.
On the Game Boy Color, the source calls him a skinny sausage.
That's a harsh visual, but it's accurate. The GBC processor, even at 8 millihertz, couldn't handle the sheer number of animation frames that the 16-bit consoles could, so they had to cut frames.
So he looks stiff.
Jim looks stiff. The gameplay had to be slowed down and calmed because the system couldn't keep up with the chaos. It's a reminder that raw cartridge space doesn't solve processor speed limits.
Now, this next part of the 1 MB era really struck a chord with me. The movie game, Boom. The source material expresses surprise at just how many movie tie-ins appeared. And there's this really specific emotional story about the mummy returns.
I loved this detail. The narrator mentions watching the movie 100 times. That is such a specific childhood experience, you know?
Totally.
And the game wasn't just a generic platformer with a label slapped on it. It replicated the plot exactly.
The bus battle with the mummies, the airship escape, the Scorpion King.
Yeah.
All of it.
All of it. That mattered. Back then, we didn't have streaming or YouTube to rewatch clips instantly. If you loved a movie, you wanted to live in that world. Even if the gameplay was basic, the fact that the developers used that 1 MB to hit those specific narrative beats, that validated your fandom.
Contrast that with Men in Black 2. The source clarifies this wasn't based on the Will Smith movie sequel, but the animated series.
Right, the 90s cartoon. And it's described as a plot-light platformer. It didn't have that narrative ambition, so it just felt like a letdown.
And then, The Land Before Time.
Oh, boy.
The source describes this game as sad and gloomy.
Which, to be fair, is entirely accurate to the tone of those films.
That first movie was absolutely heartbreaking, but the review notes that the game, while just a simple run from A to B platformer, really evoke those childhood memories.
And that's the nostalgia strategy.
Yeah.
At 1 MB, you can start to include enough art and music to trigger an emotional response. It wasn't technically impressive, but it tapped into that reservoir of feeling. If you can't dazzle them with mechanics, get them right in the feelings.
Moving up to 2 megabytes. Now, logically, you'd think double the memory, double the fun, but the source material suggests this tier was actually a bit of a trap.
It's the classic conflict, graphics versus gameplay. Just because you have space doesn't mean you know how to use it.
Case in point, Carmageddon. The source says it opens with this incredible splash screen. It looks like a PlayStation game. You're hyped, and then you press start.
And it falls off a cliff. You're just pressing pixel squares on a repetitive track.
Yeah.
They spent the memory budget on the intro screen to sell the cartridge on the shelf, but left the gameplay completely hollow. It's the box art betrayal in digital form.
The same accusation is leveled at the 2 MB version of Men in Black. The source calls it a hasty assembly line job. It's cashing in on the brand.
But then you have the developers who cracked the code. Look at GTA 2.
Grand Theft Auto on a Game Boy Color, it just sounds like it shouldn't work.
But remember, the original GTA was top-down. That perspective is perfect for 2D hardware. The source notes that the streets felt lively, cars moving, pedestrians. It felt like a living city, not just a static background.
That is a massive achievement for an 8-bit CPU.
It is.
And then there's Resident Evil Gaiden. This is such a weird anomaly. It's Resident Evil, but it stars Barry Burton.
Barry Burton, the guy from the first game. The source notes he jumps from a helicopter, which is just peak Barry energy.
Huh.
But the fascinating thing here is how they handled combat. They couldn't do the fixed camera angles and 3D zombies of the PlayStation.
What did they do?
They invented a timing-based combat minigame. A bar slides across the screen, and you have to hit the button at the right moment to shoot. It's completely different from the console version, but it created tension.
And we have to mention the 8-bit Leon Kennedy. The source admits it was disappointing at first to see him as a little sprite, but eventually you accept it.
It's the uncanny valley of handhelds. But the absolute technical peak of the 2MB section has to be Disney's Tarzan.
Yes. The source goes absolutely wild for this. They compare the cutscenes to frame-by-frame animation from early 20th century cartoons.
That is incredibly high praise. It implies that the developers used that massive 2MB space not just for game length, but for fluidity. They crammed so many frames of animation into the cartridge that it looked like a cartoon. That's pushing the artistic capabilities of the screen to its limit.
Okay, we have arrived at the summit. The 4 megabyte giants.
The heavyweights.
The source says there were only about 10 games that ever reached this capacity. We are talking about the absolute limit of the hardware.
These were the games that tried to convince you that you didn't need a Super Nintendo or a PC. They were swinging for the fences.
First up, Donkey Kong Country. I remember playing this. It was shocking how close it felt to the SNES version.
It's a technical marvel. You had the playable rhinos, the minecarts, the platforming physics, the source notes, the colors were a bit washed out, likely a compromise to keep the frame rate up, but the content was there.
Right.
It wasn't Elite version, it was the full game, shrunk down.
Then we have Lara Croft. Now the source points out the classic marketing trick here. The sticker on the cartridge shows 3D Lara.
But the game is a 2D side-scroller.
Exactly. But the review admits it was actually a good one.
It was. It played like a solid 16-bit adventure. It was misleading marketing, sure, but a quality product. Contrast that with Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare.
The source sounds genuinely baffled by this one. They say it felt like playing the PC version. They even ask if it was real 3D or a trick.
That is the ultimate compliment, is this magic. What they were likely doing was using pre-rendered backgrounds. They took high-quality 3D images, compressed them down, and used them as static backdrops. It creates an incredible sense of depth and atmosphere that the Game Boy cannot generate in real time.
It's a trick, but a brilliant one.
A brilliant one.
Smoke and mirrors, but it works. Speaking of visuals, Dragon Slayer gets compared to a Disney cartoon on an old VCR.
Which is a very specific aesthetic. It implies warmth, a cinematic quality, but maybe a little fuzzy. Again, showing that 4 megabytes allowed for serious art direction.
And perfect dark. The source says this is what Resident Evil should have looked like. It resembled 90s PC games.
It captured the techno-thriller vibe. Perfect Dark on the N64 was a shooter. On the GBC, they lean into the gadgetry and the stealth. It felt sophisticated.
And finally, the game that seems to impress the source the most. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
This is the standout, and here is why. It wasn't just a platformer, it was a full-blown RPG.
Like Final Fantasy.
Exactly. Turn-based battles. You're leveling up, you're at the Weasley house, you go to Diagon Alley, you explore the grounds of Hogwarts. It was extensive.
And for a kid.
For a kid who loved the books. This was an immersive world in their pocket. It wasn't a 20-minute arcade loop. You could get lost in this for hours. It justified the 4 megabytes completely.
So looking back at this trajectory from the 256 KB puzzles like ROX with its confusing hexagons, all the way to a massive RPG like Harry Potter. What is the big picture here? What does this evolution tell us?
If we synthesize all this, I think the Game Boy Color era was a machine of pure ambition. It was punching way above its weight class. You have to remember, this was the era of the PlayStation, the N64, the rise of true 3D gaming. The Game Boy Color was technically ancient hardware even when it was new.
It was 8-bit tech in a 32-bit world.
Exactly. But the developers didn't give up. They used every single kilobyte of these growing cartridges to replicate those big console feelings.
It's a mix, isn't it? You have the obvious cash grabs, the assembly line movie games the source mentioned. But then you have these miracles where developers said, I bet I can make a survival horror game on this calculator.
And they did. They succeeded.
And I think that's why this matters to us and to you listening. It's about the joy of discovery. When you popped in that 4MB cartridge, you weren't comparing it to a 4K TV. You were just amazed that this little plastic square could hold Hogwarts, or a living city, or a spooky mansion.
It required imagination. The technology met you halfway, and your brain filled in the rest.
We're going to wrap up on a bit of a sentimental note today because I think this topic deserves it.
It really does. It feels appropriate given the source material we walked through.
We've been joking about skinny sausages and confusing rules, but hearing about someone watching The Mummy 100 times or feeling that specific gloominess in The Land Before Time, it reminds us that these weren't just consumer products.
No.
They were distinct parts of our childhoods. They were where we went to escape.
Absolutely. We often get caught up in specs, frame rates, resolutions, teraflops, especially today. But looking back at these games, you realize that the frustration, the wonder, the fear, those were all real emotions generated by very simple code.
The feelings were high definition, even if the screen wasn't.
Beautifully put.
So thank you. Thank you for taking this trip back to the 8-bit era with us.
Yeah.
We know technology moves on. I mean, we have phones in our pockets right now that are 1,000,000 times more powerful than a Game Boy Color. But do we leave something behind?
That's the big question.
Here's a thought to leave you with. Modern mobile games have infinite storage and incredible graphics. But do they have the charm of a developer trying to fit an entire world into 4 megabytes? Did we lose the magic of doing more with less?
I think we might have. I'll be thinking about that one for a while.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
Goodbye, everyone.